us for J3 Dialogues. Hello, everyone, again. Thank you for joining us for J3 Dialogues. I'm just going to give it 30, 45 seconds for people to come in from the waiting room. We'll have to kill a couple of minutes like that, but let me start doing sort of all the boring introductions about me, J3, and the webinar before I get to obviously introduce my two very, very accomplished and interesting guests. Hi, my name is Shreyasi Singh. I'm one of the partners of J3. J3 is an education consulting and strategic implementation firm. We work with boards, trustees, and philanthropists to help them build, improve, and scale academic institutions. We specifically do a lot of work in higher education where we build new universities, also as well as work with existing universities on a variety of specific problem statements. J3 Dialogues is our effort to bring some of the most interesting voices in Indian education and hold a monthly dialogue on an interesting topic. This is the 9th J3 Dialogue that we're doing, and I thank you to all of you for joining us. I have two very, very special gentlemen with me for the 9th J3 Dialogues. And before we say hello to both of them, I think a little bit on the topic about what we're going to discuss today. We're talking about why India trusts private schools but not private universities. And over the past few weeks, if we think about trust, in any case, over the past few weeks, trust in higher education has once again become part of the national conversation. Whether the debate is about examinations, governance, campus culture, institutional decision making, we've been reminded yet again that perhaps trust is the most precious and fragile asset any educational institution or system can possess. But today's discussion isn't about one institution or one recent event. It asks a much broader question. We feel like over the last 3 decades, private capital has transformed both school education and higher education in India, and millions of Indian parents actively aspire to send their children to private schools. Yet, when the same students turn 18, many families continue to approach private universities with far greater caution. In the same country, often the same families, sometimes even the same educationists or promoters. So, why did one sector earn trust more consistently than the other? And so tonight is not about defending or criticizing private education, it's really understanding about how trust is built. To have this discussion with me, I have with me Maheshwar Perry and Saurav Sinha. Mahesh, as I tell him always, and I tell everybody I meet, that Mahesh's LinkedIn posts are my mandatory morning read. I think he's one of the most insightful, incisive, and data-backed voices in Indian education. And more power to the truth and the insights that he brings to us. I think Saurav has one of the hardest jobs in Indian education right now as well. He's renewing a 150-year-old institution, one of the most iconic schools of this country, while trying to preserve everything it makes special. I followed his recent journey with great interest as well. And what excites me most, and I think what about J3 being able to have this conversation is we usually don't bring school education and higher education together in a panel. These are also two gentlemen I don't think who've been on a panel with each other together. And that kind of wholesomeness is what is exciting. Jumping right into it, even before we accept the premise of, what J3 is putting ahead, which is why India trusts private schools, but not private university, I want to ask Mahesh the question. Mahesh, before we spend an hour discussing this, right, do you actually agree with the premise? Has India earned enough confidence in public universities or even in all private schools that we can clearly contrast trusted private schools with untrusted private universities? Or is the real story a little bit more nuanced?
No, I think it is true that schools are more trusted as compared to universities. And there are 2, 3 reasons for that, Tracy. The first thing is that schools are a need. And you tend to look at the schools around you and you pick up one of them, and the relationship starts with the parent. It's not with the child. Right? So it's a relationship where you are there for about 10, 12 years, maybe 3, 5 years. It's not a 2-year or a 1-year journey that you go through. In the school, and the parents are right up front. The parents meet, the PTAs meet, the parents meet offline. So there is a continuous relationship that you have with the schooling system. I'm sure that any school that you go to, the parents who met when the children were out there would still be friends, and they'll keep engaging and interacting interacting with each other. It doesn't happen with the higher education. And lastly, because it's very transactional. When you get into higher education, you're trying to say that, okay, if I get into this college, what is my ROI? And if I get into Y college, what is my ROI? So with the school, it's a lot more relationship that's built in, and it's deeper relationship from the parent then to the child later, much later when they, keep moving up the ladder in the hierarchy. So the relationship starts with the parents and ends with the student and the child also, and it continues for a longer time. But when you come to a college, much of it is transactional, which essentially says, this is my ROI, this is what I paid, this is what I'm likely to get. And more often than not, that ROI is up for question in terms of its credibility, or in terms of whether you stick to that ROI measure that was originally sold to the student. And to that extent, in most cases, the delta between what's been promised or what's been sold to the student at a higher education has faltered as compared to what's been delivered to them at the end of the journey. But in the case of schools, there is no ROI measurement. It's a need. You got into it and you continued with it. And all you need to create, and I'm not belittling anything out here, I'm just saying comparing it with higher education is where I'm coming for. If you give clean, good learning spaces, the outcome is that. The outcome is a journey itself. Whereas in the case of higher education, the outcome is what happens at the end of your qualification.
But you've actually gone straight into the heart of the dialogue, so I'm not going to spend more time on the premise. But sort of, I think what Mahesh is saying, that in a way, the journey and the experience, as well as, of course, the parent relationship, but the journey and the experience doesn't have that kind of same rigor of outcomes over a 15-year period in school, right? And therefore, the relationship can be built and the trust can be built over a longer period of time, or on maybe less onerous outcomes. You've inherited one of India's, you're leading one of India's oldest schools. When parents choose Mayo College today, what do you think they're actually trusting, and what do you think they're coming to you for? Are they coming to you for this trust-based experience, or are they coming to you for outcomes, or the ROI, as Mahesh said?
So I'll answer the second part of the question. I want to just comment on the first part of the statement. And I think that is the fundamental problem with a transactional view towards education. When you say that 15 years, we don't look at a rigorous return on investment, it is the formation of a man which happens in school and not in college. What more rigorous return on investment could be that, right? The problem really is that our whole attitude towards education, not in school, not in college, but as a society, is what can it get me, right? Which subject can get me what college can get me what placement can get me what. The pursuit of learning, and I don't want to sound idealistic, but the fact of the matter is, usually, if you find something you're interested in and fairly relatively okay at, you will inevitably do well eventually. Maybe not as well as you want to, or maybe even better. There's a thing called destiny, which nobody can control. But the fact of the matter is that education has been brought down to a very what will it do for me? The question in itself about why we trust schools more, I think a lot of it was covered by Maheshwar very succinctly. I would add one more element, and that is that, education in India has been primarily a middle class phenomenon. It is now, fortunately, you have more and more broader people, sections of society aspiring for education. But when I was a child, when I was growing up in the 80s, education was essentially a middle class phenomenon. Literacy may have been an aspiration for the lower economic groups. And therefore, if you see every school, maybe there were missionary schools like St. Xavier's, every school had a St. Xavier's, every school had a St. Michael's or a St. Paul's or a St. They were all private institutions. So we have grown up on a legacy of trusting private institutions for our schooling and not the government schools, right? And conversely, we had all government colleges. So whether it was Delhi University, Mumbai University, Madras University, all the top universities of the country were all government institutions. So the trust factor has, by default, been in those places, right? Having said that, I'll now come to the second part of the, which is what are they looking for in Mayo College? Well, I think, we're lucky, and you create your own luck, but we're lucky that over 150 years, we have been associated with certain values, certain traditions, and a certain quality, which is also reflected in a vast array of alumni, right? So when it comes to Mayo College, I think people are buying in to a brand, to a guarantee, and perhaps to a certain kind of affiliation, which is upwardly mobile for a lot of people. Where also, let me, I always point this out that for the echelon of schools that we're in, we're actually at a very low fee structure. I say that with full respect to the fact that we're out of reach to a lot of people. But given the facilities, I know of day schools which are, whose land area is 5% of ours, who charge twice as much. And we're a completely residential school. We're a 200-acre campus. And yet, so we try because we do want to make ourselves as accessible as we can. So that's really it. I think that by default, we have always trusted private education in schools, and we've always trusted government education at universities, whether it's the IITs or AIMS or whatever. All the best places were always government institutions. I do think that is changing, and we can come to that later.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think you're saying that, of course, you agree with the premise. And that's one of the things that we're trying to discover. Why does that happen? Because the fact is given, and I think Mahesh wrote about it this morning, right? That, the fact is we barely spend enough of our, GDP on education overall. Very little of that goes into higher education. So the fact is private capital, private philanthropy has to be a very strong fuel and engine for creating both institutions of accessibility, scale, and excellence in higher education. And so we have to find a way for, those institutions hopefully to be trusted more and more. But keeping with, what Mahesh mentioned at the beginning, kind of that longitudinal relationship, right? With starting with the parent, deepening with obviously the student, and continuing with the parent and alumni, which happens in the school system. Do you think it's because schools generate hundreds of moments of evidence, sort of, through classrooms, report cards, sports days, performances, parent interactions? I have to say, when my son passed out of school, I was so happy that I didn't have to go to school as often as you have to go as a parent, because of the variety of, events that you're called in for. Does trust emerge because, schools are very good at making activity and learning very visible?
Yeah, I think there are two aspects to this. The first is absolutely what you're saying, that a certain amount, the more you interact, the better the degree of transparency, and which brings in it a certain amount of confidence. And there can be disagreements, as there always are. But as long as you kind of know what's going on and know what to expect, I think a trust is gradually built. I think, more and more so that's changing as well, because you have schools with 8,000 students in them. And that really is a challenge. And I think which is why the school trust thing is also a dynamic thing at the moment. It's moving in a different way. But also just touching upon, report cards and everything, I think one of the key factors also is that within they know what they're getting in terms of education, because the body that assesses the outcomes of the education is not the same that teaches it. So Mayo College may be teaching boys from grade 1 to 10 and 12, but eventually the body which is going to assess is one which is the same throughout. We have a lot of boards, but still you have a CBSE or you have an ICSE, you have the Cambridge board, whatever board, whichever school is using. And I think that kind of, when you separate the two, there's that mistrust goes. I think in university, for example, again, this is, I say these things because anecdotally they're true, I mean, I don't want to. So that we all know that there are many, many universities where attendance is of no significance, I mean, you virtually learn nothing and you can kind of just get a degree. And that is the problem. I mean, our numbers are increasing. And the second aspect also is when it comes to private universities, I mean, look at it really in the context of the 10 to 15 years where actually this boom of private universities has come. So it's difficult for people to start discerning the wheat from the chaff.
Quality, quite.
But they're beginning to already, right? So you have the likes of Ashoka University and OP Jindal and so many others. I mean, there's just a couple which come on the top by Christ University, where who are maintaining standards throughout, and they are beginning to emerge. So I think that's also a factor, because trust is born over a couple of generations, I think. And though 10 years is huge as a decade, but in the time span of a child's education, 10 years is not enough to establish that much credit.
Credibility. No, thanks so much, Saurav. And to the audience, please start dropping questions that I can take to Mahesh and Saurav as we deepen the conversation. Mahesh, to come to you, we talked about this just generating hundreds of moments of evidence in small ways, right? That schools are so good at doing over such a long period, right? Is it, precisely where universities struggle? There's an 18-year-old joins, and then you have to wait the parents have to wait at least 4 years or 6 years to really see the outcomes. It's become absolutely, the students are starting to treat as adults. Parents don't get grades, right? If the student tells them grade means. And the second point, which I think a very important point is sort of raised, is the fact that, there is no centralized mechanism, right, of a board structure which evaluates the quality of learning, even if it's through an examination system. In fact, I was just a couple of days back reading that in some MBA program for, I think, one of the IITs, they go back to class 10th and 12th exams. They're not even looking at people's bachelor's CGPA. I'm guessing exactly for the kind of reason, because there's no standardization or consistency in what each university awards as a GPA or, marks.
I think both are absolutely correct, Shreyasi. What Saurav said about, see, much of what happens in higher education is a surprise to the parent. It hits them hard at some point in time, because they keep seeing report cards or keep hearing report cards from this child that the CGPA is good. And I also know that a lot of universities actually manufacture a CGPA to keep everyone in good humor. So that when because what happens is the placement depends on companies coming in and saying, I'll take all students with CGPA 8 and above. So they make sure that that is in place. The fact is that the child is not good for an 8 CGPA, but they do get an 8 CGPA because placement depends on that. Number of students participating in placement depends on that. And the parents also have to be kept in good humor. So when the actual outcome happens, and despite an 8-9 CGPA, you're not likely to get a job also, which is a question of employability at that moment in time. It is a surprise for the student, and it's shock for them. It punches them on the face. And that's been a consistent problem with many of these private universities, because listen, I don't want to belittle anyone, but the fact is that many of the universities at this point in time survive because they actually have the license to grant a degree. You remove the license to grant a degree and judge them on par with each other, 80% of the universities will fall apart. And the second part of it is, most of these universities, because I'm saying that 80% cannot survive, are essentially degree mills. They're just printing paper and charging 4 years fees. So from all those reasons, the delta between what the parent has been sold and the student has been sold and what is delivered after 2 years or 4 years is dramatically different from what is been not just sold, but what is made to be believed over a period of time. And that creates distrust. I always say that universities, survive because the delta between what's been promised and what's been delivered is as less as possible. And universities fail because the delta is much higher. And it's a very serious problem at this point in time, because we talk of autonomy, somewhere this question of regulation was being asked. And I said, listen, regulation comes in because self-regulation fails.
Yeah.
Right? Law comes in because ethics, you no longer care of ethics. So what is ethical and you don't know what is ethical becomes a law at some point in time, because that's what it's meant to be. So if you fail in, walking the straight path, and you always, walk the cross path, then someone will say walking across is wrong. And that's where the law comes in, right? And like if you look at regulation also against Shreyasi, there is this formal education, there is informal education. Informal education is coaching, right? Because both are in education, mind you. If you remove the degree granting status of anyone and the regulator status, both are into teaching students certain things, right? Now, in my opinion, still the formal education has greater credibility as compared to the coaching institutions. Why is that so? It is so because in an unregulated environment, we still don't know how to behave or use that power to benefit people. And when you fail in that, then regulation comes in, which is what happens in the formal education space.
And which, yeah. So I think you are saying that many private universities, if not all, and many or several private universities do deserve not to be trusted for a variety of reasons,
Not to
right?
exist.
Yeah. And I think the point sort of made about, actually in a school you get your certificate from the ICSC, CBSC, and IB or an IGCSC, right? Actually you don't get the main document that shows that you've cleared the class 10th and the class 12th from a school brand, but actually from another accrediting body, right? Which is very different from a university, where actually it's both the exam tester, the curriculum setter, as well as the degree builder is the same institution. So that creates, but Mahesh, staying with what you said about outcomes, because I think one of the things that you've and I think sort of referred to it also in his opening remarks, was to think about, this ROI. And you're saying that actually in some ways some universities are actually gaming the quality of learning, or kind of manipulating the quality of learning to optimize for career outcomes. Might help some students, but because it helps their brand, because they can then showcase. I feel like in India, one of the things that over the last 7, 8, 10 years, it's been incredible to see, Mahesh, that you know we have almost become too good, I feel, in trying to signal quality, right? And do you agree with that? As a sector, have we become almost too good at signaling quality through outcomes, through highest package salary, whatever, that true quality is not something we build?
See, if you were to say that the real outcome that the student has, which is placement, in this case, let's make it an objective thing, which is placement, is a signaling thing, I will disagree with that. Because an employer recruiting a person would look at many things and not just as CGPA. They will look at the integrity of the person when they meet up. They look at the intent of the person. They look at the character of the person. They look at the attitude of the person. So it is not CGPA that's getting you a job. None of us recruit people based on the highest marks that someone has got. It's one of the signaling things, but not the only signaling thing. You look at IIMs for that matter, or for example, the better B schools that you have in the country. The weightage of CAT is just 35-40%. A lot of other things that they're doing. When they look at the 10th class marks, Shreyasi, what they're looking at is consistency. Right? And I think a certain level of consistency is important enough also, isn't it? That, how stable are you, how consistent are you, is something that's important. Of course, you can explain yourself off if you had a bad day. And that is a space that the better institutions give to many of the students. But signaling which is based on a placement is not necessarily bad. It is, in my opinion, good. Because it's a proof of someone else vetting everything that you're taught in terms of not just what happens in the classroom, but beyond the classroom also, which is reflected in a 1 hour, 2 hour interaction with someone else. And they're giving a stamp of approval of what essentially it is. But signaling falsely to put them in a certain cohort is what creates a problem. Signaling to the parent and the student saying everything is all right with you, which actually isn't, is a problem. And that is not signaling, it is a lie.
Yeah.
Right. So when you lie, obviously it's a problem. But when there are certain measures that have been incorporated, which essentially tell you that, okay, what's been taught is translated to something, which is a career path for the student, is good enough.
Got it. Sort of a question to you, and I'm taking this question. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for starting to send us so many questions. I'm going to start with a question from our G3 partner, Pramod Sinha. And sort of this is to you, and this is a question I also had is, if you were advising someone setting up a university tomorrow, what is the one thing you would borrow from schools? And Pramod is kind of asking a related question to say that should private schools start private universities? And do you think will those universities started by trusted private schools like yours be trusted more than other private universities? And how come we don't see more of that?
I don't think so. Is the simple answer. I think there are two completely different environments, require completely different operations and skill sets, personnel, everything. I think the one to answer the first part of what they can borrow is, I think, a little bit more of accessibility. Universities just seem extremely inaccessible to families. even to students, for example. So I think, for a school like ours, what we pride ourselves in is that, I mean, any student can come and talk to me, and I'm the head of the school, really, and they do about various things. I mean, sometimes when they're summoned, they're a little worried, but on their own accord, they come quite often to ask for various things. Then that goes back to the parents. So parents know, okay, fine, there is a redressal system here, or there is a system of, giving feedback. Similarly with parents. Now, the challenge for universities, of course, is the sheer size of it, which is what I was alluding to earlier, that when you run a school of 8,000 people, then you're going to start facing the same problems as a university does eventually. The reason I say that, I'm not sure, I can't say that no, but because as a school, I know how, I mean, if there was an extension to be made, I can think of a horizontal extension where we create another school. Right. But to create another university, because I think the people in the university are facing challenges which we can't really preempt. What they should learn from schools is, to whatever extent possible, given that the numbers and logistical issues that they have, what they need to look at really is accessibility and communication. I think I believe really that as long as the more communication you have with stakeholders, and by stakeholders, I mean students and parents, because they're the fee payers in India, at least for most of the students in university. The more communication you have, even if you don't have agreement, and there can be dissent, there can be disagreement, but there's a respect for the institution because, hey, they're telling us what's going on. We trust them. There's nothing. The more silence there is, I think there's always this suspicion, even when it's not true, that there's something beyond what we can see, beyond the obvious, because we live in a very suspicious time as well, right? Everybody's very easy to think that there's a conspiracy going on. So I think that's one of the things that the
We
university
can borrow from them.
Yeah.
But still, you're not recommending schools to set up university.
Well, no, I'm no one to recommend or not recommend, but what I would say is that I think I know enough about universities and schools to know that they may be in the same education, but like,
Right.
I mean, someone doing general practice cannot suddenly become a brain surgeon the next day. I mean,
Got it.
they may both be doctors, but yeah, that's what it is.
Mahesh, is a great question from the audience, and somebody's written anonymously, but I think it gets to some of the nub of the problem in trust and mistrust in private universities. Is, that we know there are a few private universities, even in the top 50 NIRF ranking, and known for their academic and research misconduct. I mean, education research over the last couple of weeks has been saying that, India has the infamy of having the most institutions for paper retractions, right? There are actually paper retractions by vice chancellors and directors of both private and public institutions. We talked about sort of the overhang of regulators, but regulatory authorities are rewarding this in the NIRF ranking. How should parents and students then really make the selection of who to trust and who not to trust when even the most sort of supposedly documents that we should trust and rankings we should trust are obviously not as optimal as they should be?
Tracy, I think the parents and students know much, much better than most of us. If we think that, see, there would obviously be some people falling prey to such, mis-selling that happens. But pick up the top private universities at this point in time and see how they're struggling to get students. And you look at some which are not even ranked, who get students by the hoops. Like, for example, you take, Saurabh talked of Ashoka, let's talk of Ashoka. Ashoka is not ranked, but it does get students. So parents and students exactly know what's happening around. The other thing that you must look at, Shreyasi, is like if you take public institutions for that matter, or even private colleges affiliated to a public university for that matter, whatever the NRF rankings are, the student choices that the students are making on an entrance exam score, when we look at the cutoffs, right? Some of the colleges which are not even ranked have the best students choosing those colleges, right? Whereas the better ranked colleges don't even get students; they're on the bottom of the pyramid. So now we can always say that people are trying to do the signaling. In this case, the institution is doing a signaling of saying my NRF rank is so and so, my global rank is so and so, and those kind of things. They can keep doing that, but it's foolhardy because at some point it will catch up. At this point in time, I can say very surely and a lot more confidently that many students or most of the students don't fall prey to that. Having said that, our concern and our botheration should be about the bottom 20% who may just still go by what's been sold to them and get on with that. And that's a worry that we should be working on. The top 75% students exactly know which is a better college, because there is a very good peer group that is out there. There is a very good social media outreach that happens there, where they reach out to people, they talk to people, and some of us are also putting in content out there of what are the more preferred colleges and schools and those kind of things based on what happened in the previous years. We talk of placements, we talk of many other things. And from all those things, we now know that the signaling that I'm better ranked than someone else doesn't work, right? The signaling that, I'm delivering better outcomes for the students as compared to anyone else works far better than the signaling that I'm better than someone else based on a rank.
Got it. No, another question I'm taking from the audience is, what role does legacy play in trust? And I mean, this is certainly very pertinent, given that we have Saurav in this conversation with us, right? And on the higher education side, as we said, that enabling regulation plus sort of a lot of philanthropic capital is giving way to some very large private universities, right? How do we, and this is a question to both of you, and sort of if we can begin, how does one sort of continue to have trust in the legacy institutions, and hopefully they renew and refresh themselves? And Mahesh, to you, how should new institutions build trust? Is there a playbook for that? Sort of.
So I think, legacy can be both an asset and a liability, right? It's really how do you keep the legacy alive? The legacy is based on certain values, and those values have to keep manifesting themselves in newer practices all the time. Leadership meant something completely different 100 years ago than it means today. I think there are a lot of legacy institute. I'll talk about schools. There are a lot of schools which are not a lot, but there are some schools which are as old as us, some even older. Some of them are doing well, and some of them are completely fallen by the wayside. So why is that? I think it's the legacy is an asset if it is used in the right way. I definitely think that it gives some kind of an evidence to any claim that you're making. But similarly, it can, you also, in trying to adapt to modern times, it can offer. So I was having a discussion with somebody, and they told me that, we think you're the best vintage school in the. I said, we're not a vintage school. I don't like the word vintage. You can call us a legacy school, but the word vintage means we're old fashioned, and we're not. I mean, we have, whatever. I'm not selling my school here, but my point is that. As Mayo College, our board recognizes very clearly that the legacy will only take you so far. But the legacy has to be sustained by being the leaders of education. So we have a legacy of being the leaders. And if we keep doing what we were doing 100 years ago, we're not going to be leaders anymore. So I think, like the word, the reinvention, constant reinvention, not letting the legacy and your traditions or become shackles. I've used this line a lot of times, so I'll use it again, that it should not be the shackle around your ankles, but it should be the wind beneath your wings, really, being able to push you into new direction. Because if you claim to be a leader, you have to be the one who takes the courage to make those mistakes in the new curriculum or new practices, because the others obviously have a challenge. So as a leader, we try new things. Sometimes we succeed and sometimes we don't. But I think, that as leaders, we kind of feel that if we are to continue being a leader, we must keep reinventing ourselves while holding the true values, which are our true legacy. So your normal day-to-day routines are not what because kids have all kinds of definitions of it, right? I mean, I'll tell you on a lighter note, once I was talking to a kid and I said, no, you can't have Maggie 3 times a week. He said, sir, it's our legacy. I said, listen, buddy, if Maggie noodles is the legacy that you have, then, I think we need to find you a new one. So the word legacy also gets bandied about a lot. But
Quinoa salad.
Yes. So, I mean, well, essentially, legacy means, what are the values that you hold true, and the manifestations of keeping those values alive will have to necessarily evolve from generation to generation. Yeah.
Got it. Mahesh, the fact is, like I said, I mean, India's GER is 28%. We need to get to 50. The fact is, higher education as a system has to expand aggressively in our country, right? The fact is, private capital, private philanthropy is going to drive that. What is then the playbook for private institutions and private universities to build with trust? And, given that you interact with so many students in terms of discovering, and you're saying they're smart, what are the signals that they aggregate to make their decisions?
I think the first thing that is extremely important is the intent and integrity of the capital that's coming into an institution, right? Uh, People do have a way of differentiating between different kind of capital that comes in. When a genuine philanthropy comes in, you recognize that, and when you think that it's been another business opportunity is being taken, then people also recognize that. And by the way, I don't find anything wrong with either of them, honestly, right? Uh, and investment with an intent to make it look be a good investment, as long as your delivery or your promise and delivery delta is as little as possible, is good for me. I don't have a problem with that. Now, the first thing that you must do is the intent of the capital, and being truthful for in your communication of what you're trying endeavoring to do and how you want to do that. And whatever your communication is, over the first 3-4 years, you must stick with that and ensure that you don't, move a path beyond what's been promised and what's been communicated and what's been told to the people. I keep saying this: what you sell is what you must deliver. Others, you should not sell anything wrong. Education is slightly, it's a long-term business, so you don't create credibility over 3-5 years. It takes about a decade for you to jump onto it. Now, some of the universities, including Ashoka, was created on the foundation of something else. Otherwise, I do think that Ashoka would have taken a lot more time than what it did. And I know a lot of private entrepreneurs, large entrepreneurs who created universities. It took them a decade to even establish themselves as an option. That's because students look at your past record,
Mm.
and the past record doesn't happen till the first 3-4 batches pass out or graduate. That's when you establish that, okay, this is the kind of outcome that we're delivering. And I'm not just talking of placement, but how the students have performed, how the students traveled, or what the journey has been, or where they are, and those kind of things. And in my opinion, in higher education especially, legacy plays a far more important role than what it plays in schools.
Mm.
And the reason is, when you actually have your alumni all over the world, all over the country, because they've graduated and are working somewhere else, they become your first responders in times of crisis, and your first port of call when placements happen. Placements are better in those institutions which have legacy, because the students are now CTOs, CEOs, and founders and entrepreneurs in different places. And they come back to their alma mater and try to, in some way or the other, chip in. And I know that the placement committees of all these institutions also go back. I always say IIT Science are strong, not just because they have the best students in, but because they've been there for such a long time. Wherever you go, you'll find an IIT, and you will find an IIM guy, and those kind of things. And they do chip in and hold hands of people who are from their ilk. And it works, and that is what works in every single institution which is 30, 40, 50 years old, that their alma mater alumni is all over the place. And they invariably, when the alma mater wants to any help from them, they normally chip in. They can't say no.
So one of your playbook for new universities is you have to stay the course. The intentionality, as well as the nature of the capital and those behind it in the founding years, is critical and gets a certain perception. But the fact is, it is a long game, and you have to be around for 30, 40 years to be able to earn true trust, right? And there are not too many shortcuts other than one or two
30 years in the current
exceptions.
times, see, I won't say 30 years in the current times, but let your 5-7 batches graduate and then see what the journey has been.
Got it. There's lots of questions from the audience, and thank you to everyone. I'm sort of flooded with questions and trying to make sense of them in some thematic manner so the conversation is a bit coherent. Sort of talked about accessibility in schools. I think there he meant obviously accessibility and transparency in communication between the school administrator and leadership and the student. But one of the things, the kind of the twin paradox or the twin themes of accessibility in higher education is that public institutions are trusted more because of the examination and entrance examination system, given whatever that is happening over the last, of course, few weeks in terms of that trust being tested, of course. But the second point is about affordability, right? I think that combination of public institutions where the faith in how tough it is to get through and the fact that it continues to be the greatest social mobility option and the only social mobility and economic mobility option possible for many, many Indians is the reason why public institutions are trusted so much. So, but they can't meet the scale. So how do we reconcile those questions of trust in the admissions process, which also which is also missing in many private universities, as well as affordability of private universities, however good they are.
That's to me, Shreyasi.
Yeah, please. And then I'd love to hear sort of points also on it in terms of.
So, Shreyasi, I think every time when we talk of how we can make our examination process more transparent, uh, I shudder. Because the issue is not about how transparent the process is. It all starts by the fact that the supply side of good quality education institutions is lesser in this country, which is where there is so much of scarcity and so much of desperation. And when there is greater desperation, it will always lead to some people trying to, exploit that desperation and then get on with other means. We as a nation, in my opinion, have failed the youth. And the reason is simple. We think that just because we are the youngest population, we have a right on demographic dividend, which is not the case. You don't reap a dividend without investment, and we are not investing enough. We need to deal with this 3% becoming 6%, otherwise we are down the drain. It will be a nightmare for all of us. And the moment we as a nation start putting pressure on every single government that we need to invest more and more and more into education, into the youth of this country, otherwise we'll actually have unproductive youth which will not do anything but throw stones on a bus. And that is the worst nightmare that you have. You talked of public institution being trusted and private institution not being trusted. I think, again, you got it wrong in my opinion. That's because, see, what happens is public institutions, because they're very affordable, have more people chasing that.
Mm.
The more the people that chase that, the better the quality of intake, because there is a filtration. So the reason why IITs get the best students out there is because initially, I'm not saying today, initially, it had always the best students chasing it because they were the most affordable institution that you had in the country. And when you have that, the best quality students is what they take. And when you actually have the best student coming in, then the best faculty comes in, and then the best companies come in for placements. It's a cycle that you trigger. And you triggered that cycle 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years back, mind you, that now it's become a default option that everyone first chooses the best institution because the legacy, what I talked of, alumni and everything, they're all over the place as CEOs, CTOs and everything. Like, you actually have Sundar Pichai and Satya Nadella and everyone studying in big institutions and succeeding so much that they do keep coming back to the alma mater. So we actually created a cycle where it all started with affordability.
Yeah.
And then moved to the next level of saying, because it's affordable, that everyone went in there, and then they had the option of choosing the best student from a million students who were coming in there. And because the best students were there, the best faculty joined in, and because the best faculty joined in, everything else.
That ecosystem of consolidation. Sort of lots of questions on K-12 also coming in. And if we were to talk about, one another parameter, right, is switching.
I'd just like
Yes.
to talk about this for
Yes.
a minute as well, because I do have a view on this. And what Mr. Perry said, I completely agree with. I just want to give one more angle to it, which I think is quite important when we're talking about things like IIT and education, secondary education, higher education per se. Right, you had your traditional model, let's say 30, 40, 50 years ago, where perhaps 1% of your population went to universities. And so basically you went and then you became a bachelor and you had a BA degree or a BSc degree or whatever, and then it became MBBS. And you see, what's happened is that, of course, the issue is of supply. But from the end of the consumer also, there are a couple of issues. Firstly, there is this whole, as Indians, we have this sheep mentality, right? I mean, so much so that when Nikhil won the javelin thing, then suddenly everyone started buying javelins and, like, forget cricket, let's do javelin. That lasted for about 8, 9 months and then they came back to cricket again. So to a great extent, there is a social pressure amongst a lot of middle class people. It's IIT or bust for the children. The day the child is born, it's basically you better get into IIT, and that's because Mr. Sharma's son has got in, so Mr. Gupta's son must get in, and therefore if Mr. Chopra's son doesn't get in, then somehow Mr. Chopra is inferior. There is that angle which I'm connecting to really. What our education system needs, and I agree with Mr. We are never going to have enough universities of quality because our population is going to always outpace any infrastructural improvement that we make. The German model, for example, I had gone to Germany recently and I met, both of them are teachers themselves, that they were telling me about their son who, after 10th, he's left. And this is from a very well-educated family. And he's now doing a 3 to 4 year internship or whatever it's called, something like that. I can't remember the exact word, but in carpentry. Right? He's going to finish that for 4 years, become a master carpenter, then come back and do another 2 years of school, and he's going to do really well. So, if we cannot create universities that work, why are we hell bent on we have to create universities and everyone has to become a batch? Because the value of the bachelor's degree has gone in any case because it means nothing anymore. So why can't we think of more practical polytechnic kind of a situation where everybody learns a skill and at least is employable to some extent? I think we've got it wrong. We're trying to fix the university thing. It's not going to get fixed, because so I was reading somewhere, perhaps in Mr. Perry's thing, but I think somewhere else, so I don't want to misquote him, that there are some 4.5 crores, that's 45 million people in universities and higher education at the moment in our country. I mean, put that in perspective, that's about 75-80% of the population of UK is in universities in our country. So, I mean, the problem with our population is no matter how much you do, it's always less.
Less.
And the quality, quality is not even worth discussing then, so that we need to find alternative solutions for employability and skill. This thing, the university model is outdated and it's not going to work.
So I think there are lots of questions from the audience on that as well. This whole thing about future, whatever, what is the relevance in any case? Why should we care? Because, what's happening to homeschooling? How should curriculum change? Do computer science degrees even make sense? Or people are just bunch of questions around that. But sort of, you said, why does everybody need a degree, right? I mean, what is then a school like you? Do you have a point of view on what you could do with your graduates that they don't need a university degree? Or is that kind of a conversation that we keep for people who we feel like are wasting their time? But, the premium school children will still go on to get university degrees, right? So who is this message for?
So
and what can schools like you do? What can schools like you do to popularize this?
You're right. No, you're right. And it is not, the onus firstly is not on the schools. It's on higher education. Right? We keep talking about holistic development. We keep talking about character development. We keep talking about we want all-rounded personalities. But every university, when it makes its selection, is based only on the number that comes on that paper. Right? So the problem with schools is, at the end of the day, we are custodians to a university. Having said that, there is a social factor to it. And you're right. And that's exactly what I said about 20, 30 years ago. It was only the really elite who were going to universities. Now, for those who can afford to waste 3 years of their lives and their parents' money and want to have a bit of a soiree before they get into the real world, fine. But because of that, we have people who are putting in their life savings in the promise of a future which that university is not going to guarantee. And that is the danger. You see, I'm not, impractical enough to say that I'm representative of the common man in the country. So for our children, even those who want to be entrepreneurs, for them, they still have the advantage, let's face it, that they have some kind of a financial backup that even if they don't do a degree, nothing works out, they'll manage one way or the other. The challenge really for people who, let's say, go down the IIT route. So at 9, your parents put you in some coaching camp and giving extortionist money for an unregulated system, right? And you're living in a cabal with 8 people. You sacrifice the best years of your life, and you happen to not be in the 1 out of the 1,000 people who get it, right? So that means the 999 people who are not getting in are losers. That's what our society has claimed them to be. What happens to those 999? Because our top 20 institutions perhaps are giving you the top people at the top CEOs of all the companies. What about everybody else? Where are the engineering colleges for people who gave 4 to 5 years of their life of their childhood to get into an engineering college where they know only 1 out of 1,000 is going to get in?
No, got it. So, and I think the audience is agreeing with you. You're getting a lot of kudos and applause. But Mahesh, this is, I mean, we all agreed with the premise of this conversation, but clearly the audience is also telling us, and participants, so many people who are all from education or educationists, is also telling us that this is we shouldn't care about, or it's not only about making higher education trusted. We have to get over our obsessive fetish, I think, as somebody has said in the comments, about university degrees. And, there's so much conversation about future of work, irrelevance of curriculum, all of that. Where do you stand on this, right? Where do you stand on, I don't know, please tell us a little bit about the sort of the number of students that's on your platforms and what they're looking for. And is that realistically changing on the ground for most middle class, upper middle class students in India? Or this has become a conversation that, we are all having, but actually behavior isn't changing as much?
See, Shreyasi, I think earlier you talked of signaling, right? The biggest signaling is credential signaling. Who do you say is a better student, and how do you determine that he's a better student or a better, more knowledgeable, more informed, or more skilled person? That is credential, right? If you go back 30 years back, Shreyasi, we used to have ITS, Polytechnic, and BTech. Now, aspirationally, BTech has been sold to people who were earlier wanting to go to ITIs and Polytechnics. And it's extremely difficult and next to impossible to reverse that trend, is my opinion. That's because as a parent, I would rather put my child, given an option in an engineering college, than put them on an ITI, even if I'm earning very low and I'm a laborer running a rickshaw. That's because I want to do the best for my child. That's what, Indian vulnerability is such that you will do everything to ensure that your child achieves the dreams that you could not achieve for yourself. And that vulnerability is always exploited. All the students who are right now working in many of these colleges, in my times now, would not even get into a polytechnic, could not get admission into a polytechnic. That's a genuine case. But you created supply on the other side. And the supply, if it is not filled in, marketing comes in, and then you start selling that, and you start making promises, and you make tall promises, and you tell lies to get those students in. And that cycle, think of it from a parent side of it, Shreyasi, it's very difficult for you to break it. Like as a policymaker, I can try to make that. But as a parent, you tell them, listen, why is the son or child studying in a BTech college? Why don't you send them to an ITI and make them a carpenter or plumber? It's not going to work. It's not going to cut ice, right? Now, how do you deal with that? Which is what the NEP and the credit transfer that we're talking about, which is ABDC, a bank of credits, where you're saying that every skill actually leads to a particular score or credits, and those things added together will get you a degree. That's the only pathway for you to say, listen, why don't you learn plumbing, and then later you can become a water engineer, and later you can do something else, and you need to add the following to become that. Why don't you start here so that you become that at some point in time? But you start telling the parent that do the reverse of that, that's not going to cut ice at this point in time.
But it seems like we have these conversations a lot about these irrelevance of degrees, and recruiters should be able to take people without degrees. We should be able to create, obviously, many more vocational pathways, apprenticeship-based pathways. But really, for a certain kind of career, you're saying that conversation is more conversation than what's happening. And maybe the way to get there is in smaller pieces and pathways that you kind of at least ladder up in credentials to get to a degree rather than start with just a skill, right? So this thing about only being skill based and higher education being broadly at that time or that transplantation is not here yet.
Seriously, at this point in time, like we need to get out of our Delhi, Bombay AC rooms and start talking of this. It's not going to work. And the simple thing is this, this entire thing saying credentials don't work is a wrong notion. And in my opinion, it's privileged talking. And the reason why I say this is you go down to in Lucknow and say that, I've done the following and it doesn't work. Maybe in Delhi, you'll have lots of employers who will say, oh, you're so skilled, you understand this, I want to employ you. That is anecdotal. And that information also is very, very anecdotal. You do it on a larger scale. I'm not talking of how Google or Meta, recruits its people, but get down to the basic numbers which are at the bottom of the pyramid. There will still need to be some credentials, someone evaluating that you're good enough on a certain scale, and then employing you. And at scale, it's not going to work out.
Yeah. No, I think points very well raised in a very interesting conversation. We're at the last 3 or 4 minutes, and I do want to, as we close, thank you so much to the audience for all of those very thoughtful questions and that discussion. As we close, and just to bring ourselves a little bit back to where we started and what we were hoping to talk about, sort of just to close it off from your thing, the biggest lesson you think universities now need to focus on, as a school leader, what is your advice to your peers who are leading universities right now?
I'm in no position to answer
Oh, come on.
give any advice to my peers in university. If it's to be believed, I can't even give any advice to school leaders either. But what I will say is that look, a lot of it's a too deep a problem for me to give some flippant statement on this. But not that there's any one magical solution, but for those institutions, I think, coming back to a little bit earlier what Mr. Perry was talking about, I really do think there's no harm in education as a business venture, but it has to be seen as an educational business venture. You cannot look for quick returns. You cannot look for high profitability, and you better be willing to give it the respect it's due. And I feel if you do that, you can really make a lot of money and plus make a really good name. I think what is happening, and I will end with this, not only in universities, but my concern with a lot of schools as well, fancy names, foreign university, foreign company tie-ups, all that. You scratch the surface, it's liquor barons, real estate barons who are running those schools. What is their qualification? What is their agenda? How quickly are they going to disintegrate? Because if it's a pure financial venture, education is not the place to go. If it's something that you want to do, if you want to do something meaningful, and also at the time, there's no harm in wanting to make some money while you do some good as well. So I think that's the really, don't be in a hurry to make money. And if you want to make money in a hurry, open a cement factory. Not a
Right
school.
intention and right patience. It's been fascinating to me last couple of years. One of the things that one has seen is the premium schools are almost behaving like business schools in terms of their their university placements that they talk about. It almost seems like it's the same kind of placements communication also that's happening for trust building. Mahesh, in any room that you're in, of course, the last word will always go to you. So my question to you is, finish the sentence, complete the sentence for me. The first sign that India has truly started trusting private universities, and many other than 3 or 4 examples that we keep coming back to, many private universities, what would it be?
Not in my lifetime.
Really?
Yeah. No, what I mean to say is, see, I'll just answer this, Tracy. Just look back. Unless we are able to create affordable education where you actually have all kinds of people sitting in the classroom, there is no learning. Learning is not just in the classroom in what the books are, but much beyond that, right? And two, I'm more than happy of private education coming in and private players coming in. That's my stand on this whole thing. But the trust level is so bad because you're actually chasing a certain set of people. You're trying to see our cost of education has gone northward and our returns have gone southward.
Mm.
In my life, in my times when I was studying, Mr. Yasi, fee is a revenue expenditure. Today, it's a capital investment. Where have we traveled? What has this journey been that it's taken what was supposed to be coming out of your salary income? Now you have to break an FD or sell a piece of land or sell something to actually invest in, making your child get educated. And when you have this gap going in, there will be marketing dollars coming in. There will be mistrust that is coming in. There will be overselling that's happening. You will actually sell things which you know are a blatant lie. And to that extent, the trust keeps suffering. How do you deal with the situation? Create 40% public institution supply, great quality at affordable price and subsidize that. Right? Let the private players compete with that. When you do that, when you create fantastic quality where the best students want to go and study there because it's affordable, like 20 years back, Shreyasi, at 2 lakh rupees also, all the private players were giving MBA education. Today it's 30 lakh rupees. That's because IIMs raised the fees. It's criminal of them. As public institution, they committed a criminal act of increasing the price from 2 lakh to 30 lakh rupees, what it is today. Because it gave wings to everyone else to increase it to 30 lakh rupees. Public institution must determine the market and regulate the market by coming into the market themselves and getting the best students with the best faculty at a lesser price by subsidizing their entire education. And private players will fall in line by creating a model which works for themselves.
On that slightly sobering note, and I think on that very clear directions from both Saurav and Mahesh on what private capital and private educationists need to do, and on that very sobering note that Mahesh doesn't think that trust is going to be built in private universities in his lifetime, I wanted to close the webinar. Thank you both, Saurav and Mahesh, for joining us. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you to the audience for logging in and for all your thoughtful comments and questions. See you again on another episode of J3 Dialogues.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.